They say some debts can't be paid with money, but I learned that's only true until the bill comes due in blood, pride, and memory. If you believe that power without compassion turns a man into his own kind of beggar, then stay, like, subscribe, whatever you do when you find a story that unsettles something inside you. Because this one isn't just about what happened outside a restaurant on a cold November afternoon. It's about the moment I stopped being a man who gave orders and became one who finally heard what they meant. I was standing under the awning of La Mer, that overpriced temple of excess where people like me pretended business was art. The rain had begun to fall in sharp diagonal lines, slicing the city into reflections, silver glass, black umbrellas, glints of headlights on wet asphalt. My assistant, Claire, held out my coat as if it were some sacred relic, and my executive team lingered behind me, talking about profit margins, mergers, and the optics of the upcoming shareholder gala. We'd just signed a deal worth $200 million, a merger that would gut two smaller firms and make our investors delirious. There should have been champagne, laughter, maybe the smug satisfaction of victory. But instead, there was a man. He stood by the curb, wrapped in what looked like layers of failure, an oversized coat mottled with stains, a hat pulled low, a paper cup trembling in his hand. The rain seemed to fall heavier on him, like the city itself was punishing him for existing. He didn't say anything at first, just lifted his face slightly when our eyes met. I remember that moment vividly, the way his gaze cut through the noise and light, as if he were measuring me against something invisible. And then, quietly, he spoke. "Spare some change for a meal, sir?" His voice was low, cracked, like gravel being ground beneath a wheel. I didn't answer right away, partly because I was tired, partly because in my world, people didn't ask, they negotiated. Claire glanced at me, waiting for the cue, and the others watched with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. I didn't like being put on display, not by a man whose life had slipped through the cracks. So I did what came naturally. "Sell that beggar a meal," I said flatly, pulling my black credit card from my wallet and handing it to Claire. I heard her hesitation before I saw it. "Sell?" she repeated softly. "You heard me," I replied. "He wants something? Let him earn it." Laughter, muted, uncertain, rippled among the executives. Someone muttered something about teaching initiative. The words slid through the air like oil on glass. I didn't join in. I just wanted to get into the car, escape the rain, and forget the eyes still watching me from the curb. But when I finally turned back toward the man, something in the world shifted. He had stepped closer, too close for comfort, his breath fogging in the chill air. The light from the restaurant's gold lettering fell across his face, and I saw him clearly for the first time. The years had carved deep trenches into his skin, and his beard was streaked with ash-gray stubble. But beneath it all, beneath the grime and exhaustion, there was something achingly familiar. He stared at me with those same blue-gray eyes I'd seen in the mirror every morning for 40 years. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling, as if the word itself might break. "Is that you, son?" For a moment, everything stopped. The chatter behind me dissolved into static, the rain slowed to a whisper, and the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Me, the CEO of Viridian Holdings, and the ghost of a man I'd buried in memory decades ago. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat constricted around the word dad like it was something sharp I'd swallowed long ago. He reached out a trembling hand, but I stepped back instinctively. Claire's eyes darted between us. Confusion etched across her face. "Sir?" she asked carefully. But I couldn't move. My father, the man who had vanished after my mother's funeral, who'd left me in a crumbling house with debt collectors pounding at the door, was standing there, asking for change. He smiled then, a broken, uneven smile that revealed gaps where teeth had once been. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he murmured. "Didn't think you'd want to." My team was staring. I could feel their discomfort like heat on my skin. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" And another chuckled nervously. I felt their judgment, their curiosity, and something inside me twisted. I'd built an empire on control, on keeping every emotion neatly contained, but in that moment, my past came crashing through the glass walls I'd spent years constructing. I turned to Claire, my voice low. "Get him something hot to eat, and a room for the night. I don't care where. Just handle it." She nodded quickly, her professional mask slipping into sympathy as she guided my father, my beggar father, toward the restaurant's side entrance. I watched them disappear through the door, the rain swallowing their shapes. When I finally slid into the back of my car, the city lights fractured through the window like shards of memory. My reflection stared back, polished, composed, hollow. And for the first time in years, I didn't see the CEO who'd built Viridian Holdings from nothing. I saw a boy standing in a dark kitchen, listening to the sound of his father walking out the door. The car pulled away from the curb, and I caught one last glimpse of the restaurant's window. Inside, under the golden light, the old man sat with a bowl of soup before him. He looked up once, meeting my gaze through the glass. And though the world kept moving, though the rain kept falling, I felt the weight of a truth I hadn't dared to face. Some debts never die. They just wait to be collected. The next morning, I woke before dawn, though sleep had never really come. The city outside my penthouse window looked different, less like a skyline and more like a graveyard of glass. My reflection in the window seemed to belong to someone else, the man who had everything, and yet somehow owed a debt to a ghost. I tried to convince myself that last night had been a trick of exhaustion or chance, but the image of my father's face, illuminated by the restaurant lights, clung to me like a stain that refused to wash out. By 8, I was in my office, pretending to review a contract I couldn't read. My assistant, Claire, stood at the doorway holding a paper cup. "He's at the shelter on 8th Street, she said softly. I didn't ask how she knew. Claire was the kind of person who didn't wait for instructions when empathy demanded action. He wouldn't take the hotel room, she added. Said he didn't belong there. Something twisted in my chest. Guilt, anger, confusion, maybe all of it. I told her to cancel my meetings for the day, then drove myself to 8th Street. No driver, no entourage, no armor. Just me and the sound of my heart pounding against the steering wheel. The shelter smelled of coffee, wet clothes, and survival. People moved quietly, some with the haunted look of those who've learned that invisibility is its own form of mercy. At a corner table, hunched over a styrofoam cup, sat my father. He looked even smaller in daylight, like the world had spent the night shrinking him further. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "I didn't think you were alive," I replied. My voice came out harsher than I intended. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Barely, but I get by." He gestured to the room. "We all do, one way or another." I sat across from him, unsure what to say. He studied me like he was memorizing every line of my face. "You've done well for yourself," he said at last. "Your mother would have liked to see that." "Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to talk about her." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Then, after a pause, "You think I walked out because I didn't care, but I left because caring wasn't enough." I laughed bitterly. "That's one way to justify abandonment." His eyes hardened. "You think I didn't try? I came back once, you know. You were 12. I stood outside your school gates for an hour, watched you get picked up by that foster family. You looked happy. I figured I'd done enough damage. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he'd left a hole nothing could fill. But instead, I just sat there, silent, listening to the rain start again outside. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased. "You work for Viridian Holdings, right?" he asked. "I own Viridian Holdings," I said flatly. He nodded, almost sadly. "Then I suppose it's time you knew the truth." The paper trembled in his hands as he unfolded it, a decades-old engineering schematic stamped with the Viridian logo. "I designed this," he said quietly. "Safety system for a chemical plant outside Providence. When it failed, they blamed me. Said I falsified the data to save costs. But I didn't. I tried to stop them. My stomach dropped. The company," he said. "Viridian. Back when it was still called Holloway Industrial. Same owners, same greed. They buried the investigation. And me along with it." I stared at the blueprint. The signatures at the bottom were real. One of them, Samuel Holloway, was the man who'd sold me Viridian's original assets when I'd first built my empire. I had inherited the empire my father's ruin had built. He watched my expression change. "Now you know why I stayed away. I didn't want you growing up in my shadow." "You think I didn't?" I whispered. "You think being fatherless didn't shape every damn thing I became?" For the first time, his composure cracked. "Then at least let it make you better than me," he said, voice breaking. Not bitter. The room was quiet except for the rain. I wanted to say something. Anything. but the words tangled in my throat. Finally, I stood. "I'll look into this," I said. He smiled faintly. "That's what you do best, isn't it? Look into things until they break." As I turned to leave, he added softly, "I never asked for your forgiveness, Ethan. Just don't forget me again." Outside, the rain was relentless, slicing through the city like cold glass. I stood there for a long time, the blueprint clutched in my hand, the ink smearing under the drops. For years I believed success was proof I'd escaped my past. But standing there, soaked and shaking, I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped it. I'd just been living inside the walls it built. And now those walls were starting to crack. The week after I found my father felt like living inside someone else's life. Mine, but seen through fractured glass. Meetings blurred into white noise. Contracts turned into abstractions. I'd built Viridian Holdings to be untouchable, but now every polished surface reflected guilt. I couldn't escape the image of that blueprint, the Viridian logo stamped above my father's ruin. Every time I looked at it, the letters seemed to shift, spelling something uglier: inheritance. I spent nights combing through the archives, digital and physical, pulling files older than I was. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. My father had told the truth. Holloway Industrial, Viridian's predecessor, had falsified reports to cover up a system failure that caused 3 deaths and years of contamination. Harold Rhodes had been their scapegoat, silenced, discarded, erased. And when I acquired the company years later, I'd bought the sins too. By the time I finished reading the last report, dawn had broken, a cold gray light filtering through the blinds. I stared at the city below, my reflection split by the window pane. For the first time, I didn't recognize the man looking back. The empire I'd built wasn't built on brilliance or luck. It was built on a man's suffering, my father's. I went back to the shelter that afternoon. The air was damp and smelled faintly of bleach. I found the director near the kitchen. Her expression told me what her words soon confirmed. He was gone. Pneumonia, she said gently. He hadn't wanted to go to the hospital. Said he'd already spent enough time waiting for things to heal that never would. For a long time, I stood there in silence, listening to the distant hum of traffic. Then I asked to see his belongings. She handed me a small plastic bag, a pair of worn gloves, a folded photograph of me as a child, and a note written in trembling ink on the back of a receipt. "If you ever read this, it means I couldn't say goodbye properly. You were always meant for more, Ethan. I only hoped you'd learn what more really meant." That night, I didn't go home. I sat on a park bench in the freezing rain until the world blurred. For once, I let the cold sink in. The kind of cold money couldn't buy away. A month later, I stood before the Viridian board. My father's name was on the screen behind me, alongside the evidence I'd uncovered. Gasps, whispers, and panic rippled through the room, but I didn't stop. "We've built an empire," I told them, "but we built it on silence." That ends today. By evening, the story was everywhere. Stock prices plummeted, investors threatened to walk, but I didn't care. I'd spent a lifetime protecting Viridian's image. It was time to protect its soul, if it still had one. In the weeks that followed, I dismantled what I could. We funded the cleanup of the Providence site, reopened the investigation, and launched the Rhodes Initiative, a foundation for displaced workers, whistleblowers, and families crushed under corporate negligence. Some called it guilt money. Maybe it was. But for the first time, my money was doing something that mattered. The dedication ceremony was small, just a handful of journalists and community members. A plaque stood near the entrance. The Harold Rhodes Center for Dignity and Work. Some debts can't be paid, only honored. As I stepped back from the podium, rain began to fall again, soft this time, almost cleansing. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw him at the edge of the crowd, his old coat, that tired half-smile. But when I blinked, he was gone. I stayed until the last person left, until the lights dimmed and the city hummed around me. Then I whispered to the air, "You were right, Dad. Caring wasn't enough. But it's a start." The rain thickened, running down the bronze letters of his name, and I turned my face upward, letting it wash over me. Some debts really can't be paid, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to live long enough to pay them forward.